how bands came up with their names, today we shed light on a few of those stories.
Hey everybody, this is Big Randy with the Smarts Project. I've provided security and transportation for some of the biggest names in the music industry.
I'm John. I've been a musician for over 20 years, playing everything from metal and punk to bluegrass and country.
We're bringing you a podcast about some of the weirdest myths and legends that the music industry has to offer. This is Tall Tales and Music Mythology.
Oh, hello there. My name is Jason, and I'm the host of Evansville Podcast, proud member of the Evansville Podcast Network. On the Evansville Podcast, we talk with people in and around Evansville that own businesses, put on events, or are doing interesting things in the tri-state. So check us out at evansvillepodcast.com or find us on your favorite podcast app and learn something you didn't know about life in Evansville. Good job, everybody.
Hey everybody, this is Big Randy with the Smarts Project, and welcome to the podcast. And now, just as long as this guitar plays, let him steal your heart away, Mr. Jonathan Glove.
Hello, everybody.
So, just a quick Smarts Project update. We haven't done one in a while, but we've had some things going on in the background. Haven't really been talking about it that much, but in late January, early February, I'm going to be moving back to Virginia Beach, and we got a couple of things that we're working on separately and together. As far as the Smarts Project is concerned, I'm talking with a couple of local artists in Virginia Beach area, and these are people that you know of and people that you're probably listening to on the radio or on your iPod right now. So if things go well, we'll be working with at least one of them in the near future, hopefully for the next upcoming school year. We're going to have two separate podcasts. John's going to have one, and I'm going to have one. And I think that we're going to come at you two different ways with music history and information and things like that. And I'm really kind of excited to see where it all lands. So in the music news is somebody that you've brought up quite a few times in the podcast. Kid Rock faces lawsuit from circus owners over the Greatest Show on Earth tour.
I think I heard something about this a while ago, but
is that right? I just read about it last night. Kid Rock is facing trademark infringement lawsuit from Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey circus owners over the Rockers' upcoming Greatest Show on Earth tour. Live Nation is also named in the federal trademark dilution lawsuit filed Friday, which would have been, the 23rd? Yeah.
No, 22nd.
22nd, okay, of December. Yeah. At the U.S. District Court in Middle District of Florida. The lawsuit claims that Rock and Live Nation were not authorized to use the now dormant circus well-known slogan for the 2018 Trek. Live Nation does not comment on any pending litigation. At the time of this writing, and I checked it this morning too, Kid Rock's Twitter page still trumpets the upcoming Greatest Show on Earth tour 2018, marketing in support of the Rockers' new LP, Sweet Southern Sugar.
He has to know. I mean, they had to know that this was the slogan for Ringling Brothers. I mean,
well, yeah, I mean that's how come he picked it. I think, it's a pretty simple turn of phrase, but I don't think that there's an American alive that has hearing, that hasn't heard of that phrase at one time or another in their life. But
yeah, I mean, sure, it hasn't been as popular in the last, I don't know, probably 15, 20 years.
50 years?
Yeah. Well, no, because, I can remember we went to a Ringling Brothers circus when I was probably 8 or 9.
Right.
So, yeah, it's still a thing. They used to have commercials for it all the time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Even in the 90s.
And that and the Harlem Globetrotters.
Yeah.
That was a big deal whenever them brothers came down, both of them.
Oh, yeah.
But, on the podcast, we try to tell weird and crazy stories from all genres of music. And I can't speak for John, but I know that for myself that I tend to lean towards the genres that I listen to, even though there's been a couple of artists that I've talked to that I really don't know a whole lot about that artist or the genre or whatever. But
there's been a few I've talked about where I really don't care much for the band, actually, truth be told.
So we try to keep it interesting, but not always talking about drug-induced deeds or arguments between rappers or whatever. Some of the weird stories actually come from the ways that the bands have come up with their names or the stories behind the bands which lead to their name.
Right.
So many names, many of the stories, they're hard. For me, anyway, it was really hard to boil it down to just a few, but the names have been chosen, at least on my part, for the quality of the story, not necessarily the popularity of the band.
Gotcha.
Because you have guys like Poison, which, they have a special place in my heart, but it's just personally because I worked with them.
Right.
I worked for them.
Right.
But the story isn't that really, it's not interesting at all.
Gotcha.
So me being an old guy, I chose old guy bands and names, and I'm sure that John, having all the talent and knowledge, that he chose everything else.
I chose a lot of bands that I either grew up listening to or like were popular when I was a teenager, and then other bands that I do just like in general. So
right.
yeah.
So the first one I have is, I hope I don't. We see a lot of people don't know, but we don't tell each other. Like the only thing that we contact each other about is who the artist is or who the band is. We don't tell each other the story. So, it's really kind of a surprise to us whenever we get it. So I hope
I tried hard to put myself in the mind of Randy,
which is not hard to do.
No, and not pick any bands that I thought you would, because like there's a lot of bands I know the origins of the band name that are from the 60s and 70s and 80s, and I consciously tried to not choose any of those, like Led Zeppelin. I'm sure you've got Led Zeppelin down there.
Possibly.
So I didn't put that one in here, but yeah.
So the first one I have is Alice Cooper. Mm-hmm. The name comes from the desire of the band from Detroit, Michigan, to create the strongest possible contrast between its reputation and a name to bring all this out in the open. Alice Cooper had a sufficiently innocent ring to it, and it evokes an image of a schoolgirl with a ponytail, or a little old lady dozing in church. There are fans who do not accept this explanation, and they maintain that Vince used a Ouija board
I've heard this before.
A primitive-looking tool that makes it possible to ask questions during a seance that are answered by a subliminal self.
Or just confirmation bias.
Right, possibly, yeah. Alice Cooper, also known as Vincent Furnier, which we've actually talked a little bit about him before.
I did an episode on him.
Yeah, that's right. Is also said to be, and this is where it gets a little bit weird, the reincarnation of a witch burnt at the stake in the 17th or 18th century. Not everyone warms up to this, as can be inferred from a diehard fan's reaction. Quote, he has been married for more than 20 years. He has 3 children. He spends all of his free time playing golf. His handicap is 4.
Exactly. Well, and I mentioned I could try to tie into your bands. So a band that kind of ties in thematically there is Alice in Chains.
Nice.
Actually. I'd listened to Alice in Chains some. I was really big into some grunge and stuff like that, but never really listened to them that much.
Are those the ones that Ben Caught Stealing?
No, that's Jane's Addiction.
Oh, yeah.
So Alice in Chains apparently originally started as a glam rock band named Sleaze. Spelled Sleze. Okay, and this was like in the mid-'80s. Their bassist, Johnny Bacolas, I don't know how to pronounce that last name, Bacolas, was having a discussion with the singer of a band I've never heard of, but whose name I love, which is Slaughterhouse-5. House is spelled Haus.
Nice.
Slaughterhouse-5 being a book by Kurt Vonnegut.
Oh, no kidding.
Kurt Vonnegut being a writer from Muncie, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I think you're thinking of Jack Kerouac there.
Oh, is that right?
Maybe I'm wrong.
Anyway.
But Slaughterhouse-5, Cat in the Cradle. There was a few other books he wrote. Actually, a lot of books he wrote.
Right.
But their backstage passes, this band and Slaughterhouse-Five, said, "Welcome to Wonderland," and they started discussing a variation, shall we say, on Alice in Wonderland, which led to the topic of Alice being in bondage. Hence the name Alice in Chains. Nice. Now, the band originally spelled their name Alice in Chains, like apostrophe in. So like Alice and Chains, kind of, to avoid potential pushback from Tippergore's PMRC. And in some cases with band origin stories and stuff like that, you have to wonder if they're lying about not ripping off another band or not. Right. But this was in 86, which was a full year before Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction was released. Oh, okay. And then looks like they did change their name after that to Alice in Chains to avoid being, called a ripoff of Guns N' Roses. So I thought that was interesting. And I can remember the first time I saw Alice in Chains on MTV, my dad was flipping through the channels, saw a band called that, and hoped it was going to be related to Alice Cooper. So I can remember.
The look of disappointment 90s. In his eyes must have been disheartening. Oh my God! All right. So Chicago, a group of enthusiastic brass virtuosos specialized in jazz fusion mixed with soft and pop rock, and coming from obviously Chicago, Illinois. Right. Perhaps because of the rather long lineup, the band was first called Big Thing. But when a record deal could be landed at CBS and, very unusual for a debut, a double LP was instantly put on the conveyor belt. It became the Chicago Transit Authority, the official name of Chicago's public transport company. Apparently unfamiliar with the concept of free publicity, the authorities summoned the band to choose a different name, so they came up with the cutback version of Chicago.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I didn't know that. Well, I've got a band who's named after a band who's from Chicago here that I can talk about. I've always hated this whiny-ass band. They're called Scary Kids Scaring Kids, this terrible mid-2000s emo band. Like, I hold them in the same contempt as other third-wave emo nonsense like Hawthorne Heights and From First to Last, a.k.a. my reason for hating Skrillex. And the other bands who would alternate between whining and screaming from that era. Right. Hate that shit. But their Wikipedia page only says that their name comes from a Cap'n Jazz song of the same title, Cap'n Jazz being a very seminal indie rock band from the early mid-90s, kind of. Okay. But that's not really the whole story. I remember reading an article or an interview with members of this shitty band saying that they had actually never heard of the band Cap'n Jazz. They were literally just Googling song names from bands that they thought other people would think were cool. And they came across this. Never heard a single Cap'n Jazz song. But they did get one thing right, and that is that Cap'n Jazz is a sweet band. I do love that.
So band, they're accidental posers?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, it's definitely safe to call them posers. Damn. Absolutely. That band is garbage.
So Duran Duran, inspired by one of the favorite Birmingham clubs, Barbarella's, the band took their name from an evil character, Dr. Duran Duran, which is D-U-R-A-N-D, played by Milo O'Shea in Roger Vadom's 1968 sexy science fiction cult film Barbarella.
It had a subtitle to it too, and I can't think of what it was called, but Jane Fonda.
Yeah.
And then they had a song later called Electric Barbarella.
Yeah. One thing that I thought was interesting is Roger Taylor, the drummer. Mm-hmm. There's a Roger Taylor born in 1949 that's the drummer for the British rock band Queen. And there's another Roger Taylor born in 1960 that is the drummer for the British rock band Duran Duran.
Nice.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of neat.
That's funny. I wasn't really into a lot of stuff like that, like Duran Duran. Taste. Yeah, no, yacht rock, yacht rock, man. Not
yacht
really,
rock. Oh,
not really into that.
The original Yachty.
Oh, they were. So there was a post-punk band in the early 2000s. Post-punk being kind of tied to the early 80s. Originally was when that genre kind of first surfaced, but there's big resurgence of it every now and then. And this is one particular band of the early 2000s resurgence of post-punk. It was a band called Pretty Girls Make Graves. who took their name from a song from the Smiths' first album of the same title.
Oh, a band I've heard of. Okay.
Yeah, the Smiths. There you go. There you go.
I'm really excited about that.
But yeah, so kind of ties in with your band there.
One that was kind of ambiguous. I didn't know which way it went. I heard two stories. Was Guns N' Roses.
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to give it two shots. I'm going to tell you both of them.
Okay.
The band name may be the result of a cross-fertilization of group names, the LA Guns and the Hollywood Roses, or it's an amalgam of the names of two iconic musicians of the said bands, namely Tracy Guns of LA Guns and Axl Rose of Hollywood Roses.
Right. Well, and they're both technically true with that one. You know what I'm saying? Because both bands were named after, or members took their names from the band names.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So they're both technically true.
Yeah.
Really.
But
the guy from LA Guns left the band before Guns N' Roses got big.
Right.
So.
But like with Axl Rose, that's his legal name now.
It wasn't originally.
But whenever Guns N' Roses first started, that wasn't his legal name.
Right.
He didn't even go by that name until shortly before Guns N' Roses started.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So I don't know, man. I looked, man, with a big name like that, there's got to be an interview somewhere. No, but I haven't found an interview.
Interesting.
I'm not saying it ain't out there. I'm just saying that I ain't found it.
Right. But I just always assumed he took that name because of the band Hollywood Roses. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That's how I had always assumed that happened. Let's see here. So I've got a bunch of bands from the late 2000s or early 2000s, late 90s, such as the band Godsmack. If we want to talk about a name that was
I've heard of them.
Hey, there you go. A name that was derived from a drug as well. These abusers of drop D/drop C guitar tunings, of which an absurd amount of bands were guilty of in the early 2000s, didn't call themselves this name as some attempt to be edgy, although that may have played a part, but after an Alice in Chains ode to heroin addiction. So smack being slang for heroin.
Right.
The singer/rhythm guitarist of Godsmack, Sully Erna, has tried to claim some bullshit story about someone telling him that God smacked him in the face by him getting a cold sore the day after he made fun of someone else for having one.
Wow.
He even said, "We were aware of the Alice in Chains song, but didn't think much of it. Given how much of a grunge influence the band bears, I have a very hard time believing that." So, that's where their name came from there.
Foo Fighters.
Oh, okay. I actually have this one too.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, go ahead.
The alternatively rocking Foo Fighters, in fact, are sort of a one-man project championed by Dave Grohl, who was Nirvana's drummer before the band transcended the cycle of reincarnation. Dave Grohl has a fascination for all things alien, as evidenced by, among others, the fact that he named his own record company Roswell Records after an event that took place on or around 8th July of 1947. At that time, debris was salvaged, according to the U.S. government, from a crashed experimental Army balloon in Project Mogul, which nobody heard of before then. According to others, from an unidentified flying object with the remains of aliens still on board the wreck. Concerning the original Foo Fighters, these are said to have been a kind of UFO spotted by British and American pilots, unidentified aircraft capable of moving with high speed. It is believed that this phenomenon was actually a kind of ball lightning that generated by the friction of open air with metal hulls of the aircraft. So it was kind of like an aerial version of St. Elmo's fire.
Right.
What do you got?
Well, so there's actually a lot more to it than that even. So I'd always heard that it came from UFOs, and more specifically the World War II fighter pilots who were reporting sightings that they couldn't explain.
Right.
Like that ball lightning that you mentioned. But it actually goes back even further than that, technically. So the band name comes directly from those guys, but it also comes indirectly from this comic strip that ran from 1935 until the mid-70s, like 73 or something, called Smokey Stover.
Oh, I can't believe I missed that. I remember that now.
I'd never heard of this before. I'd heard of the UFO thing, but I'd never heard of this. So
damn you and your competency.
No. So the character was a firefighter and often used these nonsensical words that sometimes did have actual meanings. Like one of the things he said, so this is kind of like Beetle Bailey type Popeye, those era comic strips. One phrase he used was, he would say, Notary Sojak, which apparently was his bad pronunciation of some Gaelic phrase that means Merry Christmas. Okay, yeah, so weird.
Right.
And I don't even know how to pronounce the actual thing correctly. It's Nodlaig Sodhach. That's like the Gaelic spelling.
Right.
And you never know how that shit's pronounced. I have no clue how to pronounce Gaelic words. But another term he often used was foo, often in reference to his fire truck, the Foo-mobile, or even calling himself a Foo Fighter instead of a firefighter.
Right.
So there's some debate over where this term came from, whether it's like his Americanized pronunciation of the French word for fire, which is feu, F-E-U.
Right, that's exactly what I was getting ready to say.
So his pronunciation's kind of like when Peggy Hill on King of the Hill says, "Me llamo Peggy Hill," kind of like that. Or the artist, Bill Holman, who's actually from Crawfordsville, Indiana, originally, claims that it's a Chinese word for good luck that his uncle found engraved on the bottom of a jade statue in San Francisco's Chinatown. So either way, the term Foo Fighter actually started from the comic strip, but as we know, the band did take the name from the World War II pilots, and a lot of them would put like comic book characters and comic strip characters or pinup girls. You see that all the time.
Right.
So a lot of them were putting Smokey Stover on their planes, and during a debriefing where two pilots were talking about a ball of fire that was supposedly following them through the sky, a radar operator by the name of Donald J. Meyer got really angry, apparently for some reason, and he had a copy of the comic strip in his back pocket. He slams it down and yells, "It was another one of those fucking Foo Fighters!" and stormed out of the room. So that's where the fighter pilots got their name
Tourette's
from.
goes way back then. Oh, wow.
So yeah, that was a fun story. I like that one.
Oh God. Dexy's Midnight Runners.
Oh, I do not know this one.
Oh, I'm so happy whenever you do. I have no idea how happy you make my heart whenever you say that. The band is named after Dexedrine, a band of dextroamphetamine popularity used as a recreational drug amongst Northern soul fans at the end of the 70s.
Yep. And what was it for like people who were smugglers? Was that what they were, or who were the midnight runners in the phrase?
Well, the people that use that use it, but it's generally used at night. So that's where it came from.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's.
Oh, you're so gonna love my next one. I can't wait to get to it.
So the band called 311, which not a band I'm really a huge fan of, but they have an interesting story behind their name. I was always told by people that it was supposed to be code for KKK because it was 3 of the 11th letter of the alphabet, which is K.
Right.
And that's not true. It's 311 is the police code for streaking in Omaha, Nebraska.
Oh, that's funny.
Which is where the band was from.
Right.
They found out that the code was 311 because their original guitarist got arrested for streaking.
Shut your face.
So that's where they came up with the name from.
Wow.
So, again, I'm not really a big fan of that band. I've got
it's a good
friends
story,
who
though.
are, but yeah, it's a really great story.
Spinal Tap. The name alludes to a lumbar puncture, a diagnostic and at times therapeutic procedure that is performed in order to collect a sample of cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF, for biochemical, microbiological, and cytological analysis. The impossible umlaut over the end is arguably the most famous parody of heavy metal band names ever. Fictional rocker David St. Hubbins, played by Michael McKean, opines that it's like a pair of eyes. You're looking at the umlaut, and it's looking at you, man.
I love Spinal Tap. I love Michael McKean. He's hilarious.
Look, I know those guys made a couple of dollars from that, but whole thing is absolutely underrated.
There's some amp that does actually have the volume that goes to 11. Actually, there's several of them, but yeah.
Did you ever look up Spinal Tap on IMDb?
I'm sure I have at some point.
If you look it up on IMDb, they get like 6 out of 11 stars.
Oh, out of 11? Yes. That was on Reddit a while ago. I saw that. It's funny. So kind of in reference to hair metal from the 80s as well, the band At the Drive-In came up with their name from an unlikely source such as that. So At the Drive-In was a post-hardcore quintet from El Paso, Texas, or Hell Paso, as they named one of their EPs. And they took their name from the first line of the chorus of Poison's Talk Dirty to Me.
Shut up.
God, I hope they did that with their tongue firmly planted in the cheek. But apparently this idea was... that band name was the idea of guitarist/vocalist Jim Ward, although lead singer Cedric Bixler-Zavala's suggestion for a name was similar in theme, which was At the Movies, the title of a song by Rastafarian hardcore punk godfathers Bad Brains. So either way, they were going to end up with a name that had something to do with movie theater of some sort.
Yeah. You know, just with even with that, just that one song, how many bands can be named off of just one song from one? But Jesus Christ! So I'm just going to go into this one. Chevy Chase played drums in college for a band called Leather Canary, which he referred to as a bad jazz band. After he left the band, 2 members and classmates went on to be quite successful as the band Steely Dan.
Oh, interesting.
Those 2 men are none other than Walter Becker and Donald Fagen.
Right.
Friend and foe seem to agree that the band name is taken from a famous book by William S. Burroughs, The Naked Lunch.
Yep.
An expressive description of the author clarifies quickly that its take a kind of steam-powered mega dildo.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't remember who wrote the book that came from, but I knew it came from a book and that it was about a dildo of some sort.
Right.
So, here's one. Whatever. Here's one. I said I have a lot of grunge bands in this. Pearl Jam.
Oh, I was hoping you were going to do that one.
The band was originally known as Mookie Blaylock, after the NBA player of the same name, which has always been one of my favorite names ever. Mookie Blaylock, such a great name. And in interviews early in the band's so they actually did get signed while they were still called Mookie Blaylock.
Okay.
And then they had to change their name after that. But in interviews early in the band's existence, singer Eddie Vedder claimed that his great-grandmother, who was named Pearl, was married to a Native American and that she had a recipe for a peyote-laced jam.
Right.
Vedder later admitted that this story was, quote,
bullshit.
Total bullshit, was his exact words. Although, interestingly enough, he did actually have a great-grandmother named Pearl.
No shit.
He did actually have a great-grandmother named that. But lead guitarist Mike McCready and bassist Jeff Ament have both asserted that the bassist had already come up with the band name Pearl, and that they changed the name after seeing a Neil Young concert where he would just improvise or jam on many of his songs for 15 to 20 minutes longer than the normal length of it or whatever. Huh. So that's supposedly where the name Pearl Jam came from, which I thought was kind of interesting. And the band did kind of have a tendency to ramble on with some of their songs.
Wait a minute, so you're totally going to skip over the other story that it's a possibility of?
That, is it a bodily fluid? Yeah, I've heard that before too, and I could not find anything definitive from the band.
No kidding.
Saying that. Because that's what I went into. I'd heard that before too.
Right.
So I went into it expecting to see this.
Right.
I didn't find that anywhere.
No shit.
At least nothing I could find like an official statement from the band.
Probably a blog or something you can find it on.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Tin Lizzy, lead guitarist Eric Bell was reading an old issue of The Dandy. One of the strips featured a robot called Tin Lizzy. The band was named after that robot, but for copyright reasons, the name was changed to Tin Lizzy, Thin, still pronounced Tin Lizzy and not Thin Lizzy. Tin Lizzy is also an old name for a Ford Model T.
Oh, no, that I didn't know.
Yeah.
I had no idea about that. And I didn't know it was pronounced tin until you told me that.
Right.
I actually always assumed it was thin. And I remember reading interviews with band members, and I never saw that come up, strangely enough. So
Old guy thing.
I guess. But
I mean, give it 20 years, you'll be there.
Well, no, again, I've read a lot about that band, but never never came across.
That's one of those. There's. I don't even. I wish I had a vocabulary like yours. I could describe it, but there's certain things that you have people that are experts, like in the birth of Christianity or the birth of America, and they read all these books and got degrees, and they can tell you, every fact and stat and all that stuff about George Washington or whatever, but in order to really know it, you have to talk to somebody that was back in the 1700s, and they could tell you how things smelt and sounded and tasted and all that kind of.
Right, you have to have a first-hand account.
Right, exactly. Old guy thing. Give it 20 years, you'll be there.
Here's another. This is kind of an interesting band. Not that it relates anyway to that, but there was a Christian metalcore band back in the day called As I Lay Dying. Who took their name from the William Faulkner novel of the same name. Coincidentally, there was also a Christian metalcore band from my hometown of Kokomo named The Sound and the Fury, which was named after another Faulkner novel. So, and then ironically, the singer of As I Lay Dying got arrested for contracting a hitman to kill his soon-to-be ex-wife.
That's not very Christian.
No.
Wow,
Well, he even said he came out after that and released a very open secret that was almost every Christian metalcore band from that era was not Christian.
They were just trying to get in.
Yeah, exactly. So
I think that's pretty much.
You have an installed fan base immediately by being a Christian band. It's
absolutely,
true.
yeah. Just add band.
Yeah. So,
Toto.
Nice.
Drummer Jeff Porcaro, having recently watched The Wizard of Oz, wrote the word Toto on a first demo tape of the band to make them identifiable. When the band was in search for a name, the members came up with very different ideas. They wanted something simple, which would be pronounced the same all over the world. Eventually, the band explored the origins of the word Toto, and the name was chosen. The origin of the name comes from Latin, meaning all-encompassing. As Toto played a mixture of different styles, they agreed this would be the best name.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Very few bands like that.
And they were all session musicians.
Yeah.
Too. I can't think of who. They played on Michael Jackson's Thriller album, I know is one that they played on. A ton. We could talk about that. And there was
what's the one guy's name? David. There's I think the guitarist, if I remember right, is a friend of my buddy Frank's.
Oh, okay.
And
nice.
He came in concert. He's a big time session musician,
right.
But he also I think he went out. He did like a big concert in Virginia Beach, maybe like a year ago. And my buddy Frank and Mark went backstage and got pictures with him and all that stuff.
Here's a band that I've talked about a little bit before. When we've talked about Motley Crue, and I know you've brought this up before too. A band that I used to listen to a lot back in the day called Between the Buried and Me. They did a cover of Kickstart My Heart.
Oh, yeah.
Their name actually comes from a line from a Counting Crows song called Ghost Train. Which, when you think of a technical death metal band, you don't think that they're going to get their name from an alt-country pop radio act. Right. Which I love Counting Crows.
Right. Nothing against them.
I love Counting Crows, but that's just so strange. It's interesting.
And dude off of Counting Crows, he has dated everybody.
Oh, I know, right? He is.
Damn, ugly bastard.
Yes,
Jesus
thank
Christ.
you. I'm glad you said it.
Oh, my God.
You got to be the bad guy for once.
We'll play good host, bad host.
Yeah.
Judas Priest, which we actually talked about
last week.
Was it
last week?
Yeah, maybe the one before that.
Very recently.
The expression Judas Priest once was in vogue to cloak the words Jesus Christ,
right,
when these were intended as a curse, but it was not until the hypocritical curse that led to the band name. The source of inspiration in this case was the song Ballad of Frankie Lee and Judas Priest, carved into the album of Bob Dylan in 1967.
Yep.
And I believe that was one that we talked about. I probably should have taken that out. But
No.
Whenever I said it back then, I was thinking, oh, this is going to be good.
Right. Well, I mentioned one Christian metalcore band from the 2000s earlier, so I'll mention another band called Norma Jean.
I can't believe all these Christian metal bands, and I haven't heard the only one that I know.
What's the only one that you know?
Striper.
Oh, no, not hair metal. I don't give a crap about that.
Oh, you and your taste. You and your discerning taste.
Well, I mean, to be fair, obviously I can't stand these Christian metalcore bands anymore either, but I sure as shit loved them back in the day.
Right.
But so Norma Jean took their name, as many may know, from Marilyn Monroe's real name, which was Norma Jean Baker, I believe was her real name. The band also later found out that Norma means patterns, and Jean means God's work or something or God's grace and mercy. That's what it is. So they would adopt the name like Patterns of Grace and Mercy occasionally.
Wow.
Whatever. But the band's original name was actually Luta Chris, spelled LUTI-KRISS.
Shut up.
And had to change their name after Ludacris, the rapper.
Luda
Became popular. Plus, I mean, Ludacris is just a fucking terrible name.
Yeah.
It's horrible. So,
well, Ludacris, the rapper, his first name is Chris.
Right,
That's
exactly. It makes sense for him to use it.
And God damn it, I love me some Chris. I like some of his songs, but as a person,
he seems like a great guy.
Yeah.
I've never heard anybody say anything bad about him. I'm not a huge fan of his music, but that's whatever. That's me. It's personal.
He was the first one. I think I told you the story that he was the first one I ever seen that he took a gun that held a stack of bills.
Yeah.
And shot. Oh,
you told me about that.
Yeah, and he always does it with twos.
So, that's right.
He never uses
crazy.
like ones, fives, tens, 20s. No,
so strange.
Just to, like he'll have a federal pallet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talked about that in one episode. I don't remember which one it was, but I thought that was so hilarious to hear that story.
Yeah.
I'd never heard that before.
He's one of those people. I've met a handful of people in rap and R&B, and he's just one of those people that just sticks out. He is just a good person.
That's good to hear. I always like to hear stuff like that.
Yeah. Jethro Tull.
Ooh.
Did you do that one?
No.
Oh, good.
No.
In its early days when performances were so bad that no promoter would get into his head to book the group a second time, the band made a habit of thinking up a new band name every week.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's so
On their way
funny.
to the next gig, they'd go over a list of bands and that would be playing that night. And the only band name that did not ring a bell usually was their group name for that evening. Frontman Ian Anderson probably is the planter of the name that eventually struck root, Jethro Tull. The name belongs to an English agricultural scientist, Jethro Michael Tull, the man who invented automatic seeding machines, among others.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I knew it was historical, but I didn't know the dude,
I remember the first time I heard of Jethro Tull was seeing footage of Metallica winning a Grammy one year, and they said, we want to thank Jethro Tull for not putting out an album because they lost Grammy in I think '88 to Jethro Tull for best metal performance.
Yeah, Jethro Tull. Even Jethro Tull is like, we don't deserve this.
No, we're like,
we're not going to give it back, but we don't deserve it.
Right.
Well, you know that how come he started Ian Anderson? How come he started playing flute? Because he said because he used to play guitar, and he says, "I'll never be as good as Eric Clapton."
That's interesting.
Yeah, so he just stopped.
There's that leads into one of my stories actually, because I've heard the lead guitarist and singer from Jimmy Eat World, Jim Adkins, say that he stopped trying to get as good at guitar because he realized he could never be as good as Yngwie Malmsteen.
Oh, shut up!
Specifically said that.
Wow.
So despite their name having the name Jimmy in it, it's actually not based on him, even though his name is Jim. The other guitarist and occasional vocalist, when the band first started, they were like a pretty straightforward post-hardcore band. Actually had a decent amount of screaming on their first releases. Now they're known as a very kind of radio-friendly pop act, but they had a little bit more of an edge when they first started. But Tom Linton, this other vocalist and guitarist, had two younger brothers named Jim and Ed. They fought a lot, and Jim would usually win. And one time, Ed retaliated by drawing a cartoon in crayon of showing Jim shoving the earth into his mouth, and he captioned it, Jimmy Eat World.
Oh, shut up. Did they ever use that for like an album cover?
You know what? They had one release before they got signed to a major label, and I think it did have an earth on the front of it,
That's
if I remember
funny.
right. This always reminds me of, I can remember my brother getting mad at my mom and dad one time and running into his room and closing the door, and he drew a little picture of what looked like a brown football, but we later learned was a turd, and it said, "Poop, I wish I was dead."
Wow.
So it always
That's an awesome album name.
Always reminds me of that every time I think of it.
Jefferson Airplane. certified psychedelic rock pioneers coming from San Francisco, California, and also the first band from San Francisco that was commercially successful. The origins of the band name are being disputed. Jefferson Airplane seems to be the nickname of an ingenious tool that can be made at home, consisting of a lucifer split at one end, burnt or not. In such a do-it-yourself roach clip, one can stick one's joint so that it can be smoked to the bitter end.
I have never heard of this before.
Shit.
That seems like going to a lot of trouble for a little payoff.
Former band member Jorma Kokkonen, however, rejects this explanation. The name supposedly was invented by his friend Steve Talbot as a kind of parody of the names of blues artists such as Blind Melon Jefferson. In 2007, Kokkonen apparently said the following, quote, I had this friend in Berkeley who came up with funny names for people. His name for me was Blind Thomas Jefferson Airplane. When the guys were looking for bands and nobody could come up, when we're looking for band names and nobody could come up with something, I remember saying, you want a silly band name? I got a silly band name for you.
That's hilarious. There was a whole Metalocalypse episode, the Adult Swim cartoon about the fictional metal band that dealt with, they were making fun of blues parodies like that, and how like every song's about trains.
Oh, right.
And, like that long train of coming home train blues and stuff like that. You know, that's hilarious. Speaking of bands from San Francisco, though, and also I mentioned them a little bit earlier too, Counting Crows. The band actually takes its name from a nursery rhyme about magpies. 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, 4 for a boy. There's 10 lines. I'm not going to bore you with all 10 lines. But singer Adam Duritz came up with the name after seeing it referenced in a movie called Signs of Life, which was a film starring his friend Mary Louise Parker, a lady she's been in other movies too, but she's probably most famous for her role in the Showtime show Weeds. Okay. Where she played a drug-dealing suburban soccer mom who her husband dies and she has to support the family by selling weed to the neighborhood. But so Adam Duritz began using this name Counting Crows when he and their guitarist David Bryson were just playing as a duo in San Francisco coffee shops. Huh. So, and then obviously it evolved into a full band from there.
On the San Francisco tip.
Hey.
Metallica.
Metallica!
The band got their name when San Francisco area metal promoter Ron Quintana asked drummer Lars Ulrich to help pick out a name for his new magazine promoting U.S. and British metal bands. Quintana came up with a list that included the name Metallica, while Ulrich suggested Metal Mania and Hesse. In the end, Ulrich decided to use Metallica for the band's name instead.
Lars Ulrich, man. One of these days, he'll get better at drumming again.
It's so funny that you have so much disdain for this guy.
No, I love Metallica. Don't get me wrong.
No, for Lars Ulrich.
Oh, yeah, he's just such a dick. I'm not going to mince words there. Right. He plays in a band that once was great, but...
to my knowledge, I don't believe I've ever read or heard him say anything negative about you. Here you are.
Oh, whatever. Hey, the whole Napster thing, man, and they've admitted they were stupid about it, but that was just annoying.
You mean they admitted that he was stupid about it?
Yes, correct. I've seen James talk about it. James, I think, talked about it on the Joe Rogan podcast.
I think you're right, even.
Yeah. And to be fair, most of the time it seems like James is breaking Lars' balls whenever you see them play live and stuff like that and do interviews. He's always harassing that guy.
He just strikes me as like the coolest guy ever.
James Hetfield? Yeah, dude.
I've never met him, but...
No, he seems cool as hell.
I'd love to meet him one day.
Yeah, he loves music. He's very serious about that.
Yeah. Family guy. That's what impresses me about him.
He said he actually doesn't... He tries not to curse as much on stage anymore because of his daughters.
Right.
And plus, we play the same guitar, so that's cool, too.
Wow. He lives out in the middle of BFE, and I think he lives in Colorado now, doesn't he?
I have no idea.
I think he lives up in the mountains, like they go skiing and shit.
Huh.
Yeah, nice. Just totally non-metal life that he's got.
He's a cool dude. He's always seems super personable every time you see him talking and everything like that. And
looks good with his hair on fire.
Smart dude, too. The dude's really laid back and cool. Made some great music.
Yeah.
Is it my turn now?
Yeah.
Okay, another band from Southern California with some aggressive tendencies, Black Flag.
I almost did those guys.
So guitarist and bandleader Greg Ginn's brother, an artist by the name of Raymond Pettibone, came up with the name saying, quote, "If a white flag means surrender, a black flag means anarchy." I don't know that his logic necessarily leads to that correct resolution there, but I love the band.
Hey, whatever, yeah.
Love the band, so I'm not going to question it.
That's the one that the guy with no neck belonged to, right?
Henry Rollins.
Yeah.
He was the fourth singer.
No shit.
They had three singers, and there's one whose name I can never remember. Keith Morris was the first one. You talked about him in the episode where we were talking about Chuck Berry and all his backing bands, and he would fire the bands.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Keith Morris was the original singer of Black Flag.
I'll be damned.
And had a band later called Circle Jerks, which shocked the hell out of me that they played for Chuck Berry. Although it's interesting that a band who had an album titled Group Sex was the backing band for Chuck Berry at one point. So that's kind of funny.
That's all but one big circle.
Given his, yeah. But so Raymond, Greg Ginn's brother, also designed the band's distinctive 4 bars logo, a symbol sported now by all sorts of celebrities who have very clearly never listened to a single Black Flag song in their entire lives.
Damn.
But yeah, I love me some Black Flag, and Henry Rollins is just another guy who, he seems like a bit of a dick probably, and a very intimidating person. Really smart guy, though. Man, really interesting to listen to.
You should really take the time and listen to Rogan's podcast whenever he was on there.
I've seen clips of it.
Oh, my God.
I love Henry Rollins.
Absolutely interesting.
Oh, yeah, dude. That dude is cool as hell.
He was talking about whenever he was in school and just white-knuckling it every day, you know.
And he was a manager of a Haagen-Dazs.
Shut your face.
When he auditioned for Black Flag, because he was in a band called State of Affairs. So the Washington, D.C. hardcore scene was very active at this time. And him and Ian MacKay, I don't know how you pronounce his last name, to be honest. I should, and I'm ashamed for admitting that. Both were seminal, big figures in this hardcore scene. And Henry had a band called State of Affairs he was a singer for. Ian had the band Minor Threat that he played and sang for. And they both used to just use the last name Rollins. So Henry Rollins is not his last name. I can't think of what his last name is off the top of my head. But him and Ian used to just use that last name just for whatever, for promotional purposes and stuff like that, to kind of stay anonymous.
Right.
And Black Flag would tour through Washington, D.C., and their bands would play shows with them. Like State of Affairs played shows with Black Flag. So when their third singer, Des Cadena, wanted to switch from singing to playing guitar, they happened to be in that area. They were up in New York, and they asked Henry to come audition for them. He went up there, auditioned. They gave him the job. He came back, packed all his shit in his car. I think he had a Honda Accord, if I remember correctly.
That sounds familiar, yeah.
And just quit his job and drove out to L.A.
Shut up. Wow.
Good times, good times.
Well, along the same color scale, Black Sabbath.
Hey!
Formed in Birmingham, England in 1968 under the name Polka Tulk Blues Company. It was later shortened to Polka Tulk.
Now, that I'd never heard. There's another name of theirs I'd heard of. I'll see if you...
What is it?
Earth?
Yeah.
Okay.
And later called Earth.
Yep.
The band started to move in darker directions when bassist Geezer Butler, a fan of black magic novels of Dennis Wheatley, started to dabble in the occult. In 1969, Geezer painted his apartment matte black and placed several inverted crucifixes on the walls. Then one day, which had to have been a chick magnet.
Right.
Then one day, vocalist...
Save some pussy for the
right. Then one day, vocalist Ozzy Osbourne was brought around a book about witchcraft. Some fonts claimed it was ancient grimoire written in Latin.
Nice.
Which Geezer became extremely fascinated by. One night, he fell asleep while reading the book and had a vision of a black hooded figure standing at the foot of his bed. He then told Ozzy, who wrote the lyrics to what would later become their famous song Black Sabbath.
Yep.
In the same period, the band found themselves being confused with another local band called Earth, so they decided to adopt the song title as their new band name, which we were just talking about just before we hit record, weren't we? About specials? About
bands who have been named after their own songs. Yeah, we were talking about that, definitely.
Ozzy's Band of Mischief didn't start off nearly as dark as it ended up. The song changed the entire music direction of the band, and they started playing much darker songs other than musicians of the time. In 1969, the group decided to change their name to Black Sabbath to reflect their new decision and make the musical version of horror movies.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the next one.
So, speaking of bands with names that are somewhat related to religion, one of my favorite bands, a band called Drive Like Jehu, so the band centered around two guys, lead guitarist John Reyes and singer Rick Froberg. They later went on to form what is one of my all-time favorite bands still to this day, Hot Snakes. They played in a band before that too called Pitchfork, and at the same time as Drive Like Jehu was getting popular, John Reyes had a band called Rocket from the Crypt.
It's fascinating that an entire subject, you name bands and names that I have never heard any of these people.
Rocket from the Crypt actually was signed to a major label later on and had a little bit of success in the early to late 90s. But Drive Like Jehu is a band who had still has a very strong influence to this day. They were like you could categorize them most broadly as post-hardcore, but they also had a lot of like shifting time signatures and very dissonant sounds and stuff like that. They were really kind of experimental in that regard. But their name was taken from a Bible verse, which makes sense since I knew the name Jehu was in the Bible. Mm-hmm. The verse is, "And the watchman told, saying, He came even unto them, and cometh not again. And the driving like the driving of Jehu the son of Nimshi, for he driveth furiously." Which is 2 Kings book 9, verse 20.
Wow.
But yeah, so very interesting. I didn't know that was actually there was a full verse that had the drive part in it too, because I was like, Jehu, I get that name. Okay, yeah.
Right.
Drive Like. I was like, where the hell did that come from?
Right.
That's where it came from, apparently.
I'll be damned. In 1971, the former drummer of New York heavy metal band Kiss, Peter Catman Chris, born as George Peter John Criscola,
I had no clue what his real name was. Never knew his real name.
Was still playing with his own trio called Lips, when at the time still unnamed band Kiss made a car ride through Queens. Allegedly, Chris, other sources mention Paul Stanley, jokingly suggested Kiss as a logical continuation of Lips. In a noisy car, the drummer may have also been called out, maybe have called out Chris instead of Kiss, of course. Many fans, however, stubbornly embraced the view that KISS is an acronym standing for Knights in Satan's Service or Kids in Satan's Service, according to the more composed KISS adepts. And they claim that it is keep it simple, stupid. Yeah. Which I never heard that. I mean, I've heard that saying, but I never heard that in accordance with their name.
I gotcha.
However, I can see that phrase coming out of Gene's mouth.
Also true.
Yeah.
Very, very true.
Again, I'll throw out the disclaimer. I know that he's been a dick, but he was an absolute gentleman to me.
And that's good to hear, because, I've always heard the same thing myself, too. I mean, and just watching his reality shows and stuff like that, you can't help but think that a little bit about him, too, you know what I mean? So... yeah, so that's all the time we've got for right now. We do have plenty more bands that we are going to come back next week with and talk about as well, though. So stay tuned for that.
And music history doesn't stop when our podcast ends. So the material for our podcast comes from listeners like you.
And as always, if you do have a myth or a legend that you would like to hear us talk about on the show, you can find us on social media. You can reach us on Facebook at Tall Tales in Music Mythology, Twitter at T2M2 Podcast, or you can email us at hosts, HOSTS, at T2M2.org.
If you want to know more about the Smarts Project and what we can do for the high school music programs in your area, join us at our home on the web at thesmartsproject.com, and our complaint department is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at randy@thesmartsproject.com. Now more than ever, be kind to each other. Tell your kids you love them each and every day while you got them, and whatever you do in life, never be a myth.
Always be a legend.
Love you, bye.
Bye. Hey everybody, John here. If you'd like to hear me rant about other topics besides just music, check out the Gluff Nation podcast, where my brother and I tackle topics from politics, pop culture, and tech trends. Find us on YouTube, and we'll be bringing our rambling diatribes to iTunes and everywhere else podcasts are available soon. Thanks for listening.